Welcome to Breakfast at Beverley's, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the fascinating world of transport and logistics. Join your host, Beverley Bell CBE, an industry expert and former senior traffic commissioner, as she navigates the highways and byways of the industry. From sunrise to sunset, we're here to accompany you on the road, bringing you insights, advice, and thought-provoking conversations with notable guests in the field. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Good morning and welcome to Breakfast at Beverley's. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Norman Baker, former UK Liberal Democrat MP, Transport Minister and Privy Councillor. Norman has decades of experience at the heart of public policy, local transport and sustainable travel. He served as MP for Lewis from 1997 to 2015 and was Transport Minister between 2010 and 2013. Since leaving Parliament, he's remained closely involved in the sector, including being the former MD of the Big Lemon Bus Company. He also spent several years as Director of Campaigns at Campaign for Better Transport and is now the organisation's charity ambassador. He is also former chair of the Sussex Downs Line Community Rail Partnership and has been a judge for the UK Bus Awards for the past 3 years. In addition to his transport work, Norman has written extensively about the British royal family, first with his bestseller And What Do You Do, and now with his latest book, Royal Mint National Debt, which examines royal finances, where the money comes from, how it's used, and what has changed with the arrival of the new king. I know this is going to be a very interesting discussion, and I'm greatly looking forward to it. Norman, it's an honour to have you with us. Well, Norman, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come and see us today.
You're very welcome.
Welcome. Usual question, what have you had for breakfast?
Well, it changed every day. So today I had some orange juice, that's a healthier bit maybe, pain au raisin, a yoghurt and fried egg on toast.
Wow, now that is a breakfast and a half.
Yeah.
I'm impressed.
I tried not to have lunch, you see, so...
So it keeps you going through the day.
Yeah.
Do you have an exercise routine?
Yes, I don't bother with it. Well, I used to go walking. I mean, Sussex. I'm in the Sussex Downs. It's gorgeous down there, so I walk quite a bit. And also, I always use public transport where I can. So you rack up the steps, like go to the bus stop and the train station and so on.
And of course, being out and about is very, very good for our mental health, not just our physical health. So on that point of sort of mental challenge, you went into politics.
Yes.
Always wanted to do that?
I think since I was very young, I wanted to go into politics, and it crystallised in my 20s. I became a councillor in my 20s because I saw things wrong with the world and wrong with the country, and I didn't hear anyone talking about them. Things, the international issue, but why was no one talking about Tibet, which is being treated terribly by the Chinese? Why was no one talking about these things? Why was no one taking the environment seriously? Because they weren't in the 1980s. And they're not now, actually, either, sadly. And I thought, well, if no one's going to sort it out, I'll go and say something myself. So that's why I got involved.
Well, good for you is what I would say. How do you decide which political party to align yourself with?
Oh, that was very easy. I mean, I'm naturally a liberal. And that's because I believe in, I suppose what I believe in, the individual having the right to do what he or she wants to do. Let 1,000 flowers bloom, as Mao Zedong said, in fact. I believe in we have to have a capitalist system. Communism doesn't work, but you can have a capitalist system that gives incentives to do the right thing, financially the right thing, and therefore guides people to sensible policies. So that's a kind of liberal view of life, and one that treats the environment seriously. So, and also civil liberties very much. I totally think it's important that the balance between the state and the individual is well judged. And my concern over recent years has been that the state, the government of the day, has become more powerful and the individual, therefore, less powerful. And the extreme of that is in China, where you can't move without the state knowing what you're doing, which is a terrible situation to be in.
Well, I'm certainly with you on the civil liberties, which is why I used to be a sort of criminal defence lawyer, although some people might not see it like that. But you reached high office, Transport Minister, as I've said, 2010 to 2013. Then you moved on and worked in the Home Office, and you were looking at, crime prevention. Which was your favourite brief, transport or crime?
Oh, transport, definitely. I mean, I naturally believe in transport. I wanted to be a Transport Minister. I thought we'd have a coalition after the 2010 election. I could see the way the wind was blowing. And I thought we need to be in coalition rather than standing outside. Yep. So I went to see Nick Clegg in 2009 and said, we need to have a coalition. We can't stay outside. We need to be in the driving seat with the Conservatives, because I knew Labour would be finished at that point. And by the way, can I be Transport Minister? And he
said yes.
He said yes. So
what better accolade? So had you been involved in transport before?
Yes, I'd shadowed it for the Lib Dems, and I liked it. I wanted to take the environment seriously, which people didn't always want to do. And I thought I could do more good in transport, where, after all, the sector is responsible for a large percentage of carbon emissions, far more important and far more influential in environmental terms than, say, worrying about polar bears at DEFRA. I'm in favour of polar bears, but actually you can only do so much at DEFRA. You can do a lot more, I think, at transport, which is why I wanted to do that.
And it's all about sustainable travel now. And do you think that's part of your legacy from what you achieved when you were Transport Minister?
I think the best thing I ever did in government was the Local Sustainable Transport Fund, which was my creation. And I remember, you've got to be in the right place at the right time. I remember ringing up David Laws, I think it was, or maybe Danny Alexander, the Treasury, and saying, I want to do something about sustainable transport. And he said to me, you phoned at the right time, I'm looking at the budget now. And I came off that phone call with, I think, £650,000 to do something on sustainable transport. We created a local sustainable transport fund, which had, I think, the correct approach, which was that the government set the target saying, we want to have a system whereby if we invest money in transport, you must decrease carbon emissions and you must help the economy. If you can demonstrate those two things in your area, you can have some money. And, councils did. And it meant sometimes they came back with a new railway station, sometimes they came back with a pinch point issue, sometimes they came back with a bus link between where people lived and an estate, industrial estate. Sometimes it's about bus lanes. The answer was different on every occasion, but we gave them the flexibility to have that cash, provided they could hit those two overarching targets. And I appointed a body of people to examine bids, including some from local government, some from the transport industry, myself, obviously, Cadman, who also was on it. And that worked very harmoniously. And it was so successful. Every single council that was eligible applied, every single one of them. And we were able to meet a huge number of demands. And the great thing about it from my point of view was, because this was small things, and I'm a great believer in small things rather than one big thing. A great memory small things were accomplished in that time. Because I was there 3.5 years, I had a unique opportunity as a Transport Minister of approving something and then going to open it.
Yes.
In that time, which is really nice.
And so you did bus and rail.
I did bus and rail and cycling.
Yes. Do you think, well, we'll leave the cycling just to one side for the moment. Do you think bus has always been the poor relation of rail?
It's been the poor relation of rail, it's been the poor relation of cars and the poor relation of aviation. And that's because there's not been the critical mass of industry to argue for it. The CBT, of course, does its best, I'm sure. But it's less powerful, less access to number 10, which is important, than, say, Heathrow Airport. And therefore it gets squeezed out. It's also the case that, a great many MPs don't use buses, whereas they do use trains.
And they often don't understand buses.
They don't understand buses. And what infuriated me was that when I was buses minister, I had a package of measures to launch to help the bus industry and get people on buses. And it was quite a good package. And I think Patrick McLaughlin was the Transport Secretary, who's a lovely man. I like Patrick very much, although he's not my party. I love working with Patrick. And I said, Patrick, I want to make a statement to the Commons on this package of bus measures. And he said, yeah, that's fine, go and do it. George Young, who was the leader of the Commons at the time, said, we're not going to allocate time in the Commons for buses. You can't have any time to do that. You stopped me doing it.
Must be so frustrating.
Well, it's frustrating. It's also stupid because buses are the most used form of public transport, and not to take them seriously. That's changed a bit, I think, and it's changed a bit in the last 10 years beneficially.
Do you think the new sort of the various mayors in the various large cities? Do you think that's made a big difference?
That has made a difference. Andy Burnham, I think, has done again. I'm not being partisan because I'm Lib Dem. He's Labour. Patrick was Tory. But Andy Burnham's done a really good job, I think, in Manchester up there with the buses. Really good job. And I think what he's showing is that you can get people on buses who wouldn't think about doing so. It's not just him who's done that. You've had good examples with the private sector that have done that over the country in patches. But in my part of the world, in Brighton and Hove, what a fantastic bus service we got down in Brighton and Hove. I don't use my car where I am in Lewis because I got a bus to Brighton every 10 minutes. I've got a train to Brighton every 15 minutes. I mean, why do you want to use a car?
And the biggest competitor for the bus industry is the car.
It is. And there was a huge fuss, I remember, in my part of the world when the local councils, and by the way, the local council in Brighton, which has changed party control a number of times over the years, has always been supportive of buses. And that consistency has been key to getting go-ahead to invest in bus lanes and everything else in Brighton and Hove. There's a bus lane put in by, I think, East Sussex County Council, must have been, which went a long way along the coast into Brighton. I remember when it was proposed, it was all the motorists were up in arms saying, we can't do this, how terrible. Well, that bus lane is now full of buses. And actually the cars, I would suggest, probably flow freer on one lane than they did on two, because every bus can take 75 people, and they're all quite busy.
So when you were Transport Minister, you were known very much as a supporter of the bus industry, and you were highly regarded for that. But two questions arising from that. When you stepped down from being a Transport Minister, and then eventually you left politics, how did you cope with the shift, and did you enjoy that shift?
I didn't enjoy the shift very much from the DFT to the Home Office. It was just across the road.
Yeah.
But it was like going from the beach, the sunny beach, to out of Siberia. I mean, the Home Office was not a nice place. It was very dysfunctional, still is. And it was
Is that something to do with its size, do you think?
It's to do with, I don't know what it's to do with. It might be, if we believe in feng shui, I have no idea what the explanation is, but it was a cold building, and they had a sign up because the bits of the building, after different people who were involved in Home Affairs, one of them was Robert Peel, the police, originator of police services, and one was Elizabeth Fry, who'd done some work. And he had a sign up in the building saying Peel and Fry, and I thought it was just quite funny. No one else thought it was funny at all. The Home Office doesn't do humour, not even inadvertently, It was terrible over there, and he was very hard up with Theresa May, who didn't want to treat the coalition seriously, whereas all the Tories I worked with and the DFT did do that, and very collegiate. Philip Hammond, he was no Lib Dem, I can tell you. Would say to me, what's your view on aviation? It wasn't my portfolio, but he had the decency to ask me what my view was. And we worked very well at the DFT. Home Office was completely different. So I was sent over there because Theresa May deliberately tried to squeeze the Lib Dems out. Nick Clegg thought I'd be a thorn on her side.
Well, you have a reputation for being very dogged in your determination. I like that about you.
And when I moved to the Home Office, apparently Theresa May, the next cabinet meeting was delayed for 15 minutes while she lobbied David Cameron, saying, "What on earth are you doing putting Norman Baker in there?" And David Cameron said, "Well, I can't stop it. It's Nick Clegg's appointment under the coalition," and she was furious about it. And then he briefed against me the next day in the papers. I mean, it was like, baptism of fire, negative stuff in the papers immediately.
And that's a tough gig when that happens.
Yeah, well, it's just how the Home Office behaved.
But just dealing with that issue around whether it's transport, buses, rail, cycling, trains, planes, whatever it is, the Great British public aren't bothered actually what the politics are. They just want to know they've got a good, reliable service, that it works, it's good value for money, etc., etc. In the Home Office, they just want to know that the streets are safe, etc., etc.
Well, they don't even want to know that. I mean, the Home Office was I say, dysfunctional, and they were obsessed with trying to get migration numbers down even then, and irrespective of the consequences for the economy. And you had people in other departments, David Willits, for example, who were doing education, saying, "What on earth are you doing stopping students coming into the country?" So the Home Office was out in a limb. It was also at odds with number 10 quite a lot. It's a hard position to be in there. Whereas DFT had been sweetness and light. I mean, people smiled in the DFT. The tea lady would come and say hello to you, and it was just a nice place to work. And I'll give you a little vignette, which is in my book, one of my political memoir. We have done a few books, as you know, Beverley.
We're going to talk about them, yes.
But this particular one was that there's a problem with the windows in DFT. I was the minister for the DFT internally as well. It's part of my portfolio. There was a problem with the windows; it wouldn't open, and it was either far too hot or far too cold. Although they would open if you had a key. So I said to my private office, who were wonderful, by the way, civil servants were wonderful in my office, "Can we get a key for the window to open the window?" And they wouldn't give me one. And I said, eventually, I found out who the civil servant who was stopping me having a key. And I said, I want in writing why I can't have a key. And this ludicrous email came back with a number of reasons why I couldn't have a key. If you open the window, papers might blow out. You might be subject to someone firing air guns from across the road. If you sit in the windowsill, someone might fall out into. It could be a risk to security. We're on the 6th floor, for heaven's sake. The list. And the better one was, the window locks might wear out, was one of the reasons. This unbelievable. It's in my. I printed it in whole in my book, actually. Unbelievable email. Anyway, Joe Guthrie, who was head of my private office, lovely civil servant, said, shall I go and get a key from around the corner? That's in Stratton Ground. And I said, yeah, go around and get a key. So she got a key. She said, well, I have to hide it because if they find it, they'll take it away. They'll take it away if they find it. So anyway, I got this key and we opened the window, and of course that was causing a furore. And then Patrick McLaughlin came down to see me. And he said, have you been getting a key for this window? And I said, yes, Patrick. He said, oh, can I borrow it?
Yes, I knew that was going. Well, it's nice. It's nice to hear the lighter side. But just looking now, who would you say in current government or in current politics is known as, the bus operator's friend?
Well, that's very difficult, isn't it? I think I'm not close enough to people in government now to know the answer to that definitively. What I would say is that the Treasury, which thought buses were irrelevant in my day, and it was hard work to get anything out of them, they did have a £2 flat fare, which they brought in, and it's gone £3. But they've kind of recognised that buses have a role. What people haven't recognised across government, I think, say Department of Work and Pensions, is that you can get the unemployment rate down, you get more people in employment, you've got a good bus service. And, you can give certainty to people if the bus is going to be there next week. Because in my time, I saw people with good jobs who had to leave their jobs because the bus service was withdrawn at virtually no notice. Well, you'd know that from your work as traffic commissioner, 28 days, whatever it was. And it was just suddenly gone. And you can't operate on that basis. You can't treat people that way. So I think it has got better in government from what I see. And I think, to be fair to Boris Johnson, I think Boris Johnson was an absolutely terrible prime minister, but he was in favour of buses. And he was quite good for buses. And I think he set the standard for buses. It's one thing he did, I think, that was worth him doing.
Yes, I would agree with that. And certainly TCs, I can't speak for them now, nor should I, but certainly when I was a TC, there was always this sort of, in your mind, there's this fictional little old lady who's waiting at the bus stop to go and see the poorly husband in hospital. It's pouring down with rain, the bus doesn't turn up, she misses him and it all goes horribly wrong. Or the person that's got their job interview or their first day at work and they're reliant on that bus to turn up at the time it says it will, or up to a few minutes late, and get them there because it's really important. It's serving people in their daily lives for things that are monumental in their lives, but to the bus operator, may not be. And I think bus operators have got a lot better at seeing the passengers as customers.
They have got better.
And they talk about them now as customers.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that's a bit patronising.
Well, I prefer passengers. But
so do I prefer passengers.
Well, there we go, was one. But it's that impact on people's daily lives when they get on the bus. They're on that bus for a specific reason, to see somebody or do something really important. Yeah,
that's exactly right. Now, I think the difficulty is buses in rural areas or in where there's a low frequency, because if you get your car, you know where the car's going to go. You're in the car and you know what time you're going to leave. If you've got a train, every train station's now got the information about where the next train is. And indeed, you can go on the internet and it'll tell you where the train is, as it did this morning. I go and check the train's running before I go to the station. But if you want to get a bus, okay, some places have got bus stop information.
Yes.
If you're modern, as I'm not particularly, you've got an app which tells you where things are. Brighton Hove got a very good app and tell you where buses are.
I bet you've got an app, really.
Well, I haven't actually for that. But if you're a little old lady, you're a little old lady. She won't have an app. She goes to the bus stop in this country lane. She's got no idea whether the bus has been or not. So it's one form of transport where you don't know whether the bus has been or gone. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's not telling everybody to get an app. It's not the answer.
And especially in rural areas, it might not work.
Yeah, that's right.
So can we just look at taxation for a moment? I know it's a matter very dear to your heart.
It is.
Just first, with regard to transport, I know TCs used to say, why can't the money that because, it's the only place they can impose a financial penalty if the buses run on time. I'll just tell you a funny story. When I was commissioner, I fined a bus group that doesn't like to come second over £350,000, and it was in the front of the Manchester Evening News. And my auntie rang my mother and said, "Oh, Beverley's on the front of the Manchester Evening News." And Mummy rang me. She said, "Beverley," she said, "somebody in your office has fined this bus company £350,000. I said, "Well, that'll be me, Mummy." She said, "Oh," she said, "can they afford it?" I said, "Yes, Mummy, they can afford it." But the point is that money just went into the public coffers.
Yeah.
It didn't go to improve the bus services, to improve the services for the passengers. What's your view on ring fencing money? And we'll come on generally to taxation, ring fencing money for specific projects.
Well, I mean, I think there's a danger in linking a fine which is imposed to how that money is spent. And that's certainly the view of the Ministry of Justice, because let's say, you find someone for shoplifting. What happens to that money? Does it go back to the supermarket, or does it go somewhere else? And the danger is you end up not in that situation. I can't think of an example, but you could end up in a situation where you find somebody, it's incentive to find somebody because the money is released. You've got to be very careful how that works.
Yeah. HSE would be a good example.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. That's a very good example. So I'm not in favour of that. What I am in favour of is a taxation regime, and I mentioned this earlier on when you asked me why I was a Liberal, that encourages good attitudes and sensible choices. And the danger we've had over recent years is, if you look at, I used to ask a question every year in opposition. They've now stopped answering it the same way. I noticed, because Carol and Lucas then took up the same question, and they've now stopped answering it. Which is, what is the relative change percentage-wise in costs of travelling by air, bus, rail and car? And I used to ask that question every year, and what it showed was that the cost of aviation and car travel was going down relative to wages, and the cost of going by bus and rail was going up, and going up more in bus than it was in rail, which is completely contrary to what the government says it wants to do, because all governments since 2008 or thereabouts have said climate change is important, and we want to get more people on public transport. Well, if you want more people on public transport, why are you charging people excessive amounts when you're making it cheaper to go by car? And we've still got the situation where fuel duty has been frozen now since 2011, 15 years. In fact, there's a so-called temporary cut, which was brought in at COVID time, which is still there. Meanwhile, bus and train fares have gone up. Now, there has been a £3 cap on the bus fare. It was £2. And the government has, for the first time ever, I think, in my knowledge, frozen rail fares, or most rail fares, this year. So that's a sensible step. That's the Treasury doing that. But, if you look at the pattern over the years, if you want to look at it purely in monetary terms, you would buy a car. You wouldn't get on a bus or a train, and that's got to be wrong. Now, the reason for that is because the Department for Energy and Climate Change and the Department for Transport have wanted to promote bus and train travel. The Treasury has wanted to see the income stream coming in from fares and reducing the subsidy for rail. I mean, so a consequence, they've had a different policy from the DfT. And Number 10's had another policy. Andrew Gilligan was there, at Number 10. That's a totally different policy. So people say to me, what's the transport policy of the government? I say, well, there's 3 transport policies at least. There's DfT, Treasury, and Number 10. Which one do you want?
And who holds the purse strings?
And who holds the purse strings. And it really should be, I learnt this in government, both at the DfT and the Home Office, the best decisions are taken when Number 10, Number 11 are blindsided and out of the equation, because they think they know best and they don't. Because the people at Number 10 think they're more important than the number of people at DfT, but they don't have the same experience, the same depth of knowledge, and they take decisions which are wrong. So keep them away, as far away as possible from decision making. You get better government.
I admire you, because I would just get so cross if I was. Some people said, "Why didn't you go to politics, Beverley? Why didn't I?" For that very reason, I get so cross when I would think, "You idiot, you've done things wrong or wrongly." I wouldn't have the patience. I admire your patience, but I also admire your tenacity, because you've always been a great advocate for whatever it is you believe in. Which brings me sort of nicely, really, into your books. Now, when you were Transport Minister, I had no idea you were interested in the public finances, the income that comes in, not just in taxation, but in terms of the royal family, because I saw you at the Isle of Wight Literary Festival,
Yes.
didn't I, where you were talking about your latest book. How did you become interested in how the royals' money comes in and is spent?
I think I just object to a number of things in life. I object to people who are dishonest. I object to people who are hypocritical. And I object to people who rip off the public purse. And I object to unfairness. I mean, if you ask me what drives me in politics and in life, it's fairness. And I hate unfairness in life. And I object to the fact that the royal family is hugely expensive compared to...
How did you find out in the first place?
Well, I mean, there are odd stories in the papers, and then you then start looking into yourself. You investigate it yourself, and the more you look at it, the worse it is, to be honest with you.
So you started asking questions and didn't like the answers.
I'm the only MP in 18 years in Parliament who introduced a debate on royal finances. And it's made it as difficult as possible in Parliament to introduce anything about the royals. I had to link it back to an obscure Treasury paper to get it past the Table Office, which is the body that allows debates to go forward.
And were you allowed that debate? I
was allowed it because I linked it back to Treasury paper. They couldn't stop me, but it was a most peculiar way of doing it. Rather than coming straight out and saying I want to debate, they just had to find an excuse.
What were you wanting to achieve?
I wanted to achieve a situation whereby we had transparency and accountability. And I think that anyone who performs a public duty, whether it's a local council or an MP or a member of the House of Lords or the NHS or a school or the royal family.
Or a PM.
Or yeah, absolutely. Anyone who's receiving public funds and delivering a public service needs to be accountable. And the royal family is not accountable in the same way. They've excluded themselves by and large from the Freedom of Information Act. And the existence of deference to them, which is going back a long way, and the ability to manoeuvre the press, which they have, and the resort to lawyers to shut up people they don't like, all those things mean that the public at large doesn't know the position. And, so I just think that's wrong. I mean, it's not about being for or against the monarchy.
No, I understand that.
I mean, I look at the monarchies in Norway and Sweden, and that's a perfectly legitimate mechanism. It's not about that. It's about whether you want a monarchy that is costing 10 times more than any other European monarchy, which is less accountable than any other European monarchy, and which has got the ability to influence laws and take money from the public purse in a way that other monarchies don't. I mean, and I don't think that's right. And I think if you ask me where the public is, I think the public is probably in favour of the monarchy, but it's not in favour of the monarchy we've got.
Well, I wanted to ask you that because monarchy is a big word. Of course, most of us in our lives, and you and I are similar vintage, have always known the Queen as the Queen, and we've never known anything differently. And there's a huge amount of deference to the Queen and a huge amount of loyalty and affection.
Yes.
Do you think that since the late Queen passed away, that deference, that loyalty, that affection has been eroded?
It has been eroded.
And consequently, public commentators, the press, are now more willing to question, to comment, sometimes to comment adversely, than they would have been when the Queen was alive.
They are. I mean, there was a degree of understanding that things weren't quite right when the Queen was on the throne, but nobody wanted to upset her because she was held in high regard, and she was an old lady, and it was rude to otherwise. So a lot of things were unsaid. But there was a knowledge base of things banking up that I think that in the press, certainly, that wasn't quite right, that things weren't quite right. It's been added to by, of course, the shenanigans of Andrew Mountbatten of Windsor, who has inadvertently opened a Pandora's box.
For sure.
And people are now saying, well, what was he doing and why wasn't he stopped? And a whole lot of questions are now tumbling out as a consequence of his behaviour. So I think people are more interested in the facts than they were. And there was an excellent Channel 4 documentary last year about the Duchy of Cornwall, which was horrific in terms of what it showed. It showed, for example, that the Duchy of Cornwall was charging the NHS almost £1 million a year to park ambulances in an empty warehouse in London. It showed that they were charging soldiers who were fighting for king and country to practice on Dartmoor. They were charging the Royal Navy to moor ships. I mean, this is outrageous behaviour, and I think the public see it as outrageous. So those sorts of
now
things,
they know about it.
Now they know about it, yeah. And I don't want to bore you with figures. We don't want to talk about monarchy forever, but let me give you one stat only, which was that in the last year of the civil list, which is the method of funding the royal family, for 251 years until 2011. The last year was 7.9 million was given the public purse. It was replaced by the sovereign grant as a consequence of pressure from Charles and the palace. This year, the sovereign grant is 132.1 million. 15 years ago, 7.9 million. Now, you don't have to be a Republican to think that's obscene.
I certainly understand where you're coming from, but I think there is a lot more in the press about, for example, the Duchy of Cornwall, which has now gone to William.
Yes.
And who knows what the future will hold on that. And as we say, we're not here to talk about the monarchy all the time, but it's just a really interesting piece of work that you do. So just take it back to something else. The Hutton Report.
The Hutton Report, yeah. The royal book, by the way, is called Royal Mint National Debt, which reflects the fact that we pay out the money and they get it.
Yes, yes, which is your thing about fairness and unfairness. So David Kelly.
Yes, David Kelly.
Again, you and I both have a vintage to know and remember all of that. For our younger listeners who may not know, quick sort of headline summary on why you think that David Kelly, and you can explain obviously who he was, why you think he was murdered as opposed to committing suicide.
He was a great public servant. He was an advocate for Britain, actually. He did a huge amount of great work as a UN weapons inspector to discover what was going on in Iraq, what was going on in Russia. One of these people you don't really hear about, didn't hear about until 2003, who was a triumph of the civil service, if you like. And then he got involved in the lead up to the Iraq War, and questioned the government's statements about weapons of mass destruction, which we now know, of course, never existed in terms of Iraq. And then he was found dead on Harrowdown Hill in Oxfordshire under unexplained circumstances.
And that was very shortly after the interview, wasn't it?
That was, he was shortly after he was interviewed by the... his name was deliberately released by the government, which is quite shocking. He was put in the frame up there by the government of the day, just to hang him up, really, and make sure he took the flak. And then he was found dead shortly afterwards. But, I mean, he had been in quite good shape. He'd been booking another flight to Iraq. His daughter was getting married and so on. So the circumstance, and his wife wasn't very well. So, the circumstances suggesting he would commit suicide were not right. He was also of a high faith, which is against suicide as a consequence of what they believe in. And to cut a long story short, the explanation as to how he committed suicide simply doesn't hold water. And my book sets out the reasons for that. And it wasn't properly investigated. It was a non-statutory inquiry by Lord Hutton. It's the only occasion ever when an unexplained death has not been subject to an inquest or a statutory inquiry, which is the same function as an inquest. A non-statutory inquiry has as much legal basis as me talking to you now this afternoon, and that's not right. And it was hopeless. And the whole Hutton inquiry was about the BBC versus the government. That's what Hutton concentrated on, not David Kelly. And again, just one snippet. I put a Freedom of Information request in afterwards to Thames Valley Police, which came back with the answer that there were no fingerprints on the knife you're supposed to have used, no fingerprints on anything there. It had all been wiped clean. I found that out. Lord Hutton didn't find that out. That wasn't part of the inquiry. I mean, that's one stat, just only that. I mean, the whole thing was a complete farce.
And what was your motivation for writing the book?
Well, again, it was very obvious to me right in the beginning that the whole thing was being swept under the carpet. I didn't start with the conclusion he'd been murdered or committed suicide. I didn't start with that. But what I did start with was the feeling that something needed to be properly investigated, and the media wasn't doing it. The media got diverted by Alistair Campbell onto looking at the BBC versus the government, and poor old David Kelly didn't get a look in. And that was so obvious to me. And there were very, very few journalists who were looking at that issue. So I thought, again, same reasons entering politics. No one was doing it, so I thought I'd do it.
You should have been an investigative journalist.
I like being that. In fact, in some ways, I am.
You are.
Yeah.
Would you like to have been a lawyer?
Well, I get paid a lot more that way.
Oh, I walked straight into that one, didn't I, Norman? Straight into that one. Do you think that politicians are paid enough today for the risks they take and the job they do?
I don't think you can quantify financially the risks that they face. And it's got nastier since I stopped being an MP, because I stopped being an MP in 2015. And I had a very nice time. People were polite to me. They were quite robust in their arguments, constituents and others. That was fine. I didn't mind that very much. But my office was in the high street. It had an open door. People could walk into it and raise matters. And I had a panic button under the desk, but I never used it in 18 years.
Was it connected to anything?
Yeah, the police station. But I never had to use it. And I started enough to use it. Only one instant really of any sort in 18 years. That was not very serious. That all changed after Brexit. And whatever you think about Brexit, it was very polarising. And people ended up... Yeah, still is. People ended up, being very aggressive to the other side of the argument on both sides. And that wasn't very conducive. And people then started becoming less polite and more aggressive to MPs. And indeed, we've had one or two MPs, of course, murdered, which is a quite shocking situation. David Amos and Joe Cox being murdered. And really that's not acceptable. And people should be able to debate politics without resorting to that sort of tactic, I think. And we're now in a different world. And if I talk to my colleagues who are in the Commons now, they'll tell me it's all much more aggressive. Go and see an MP now, I go and see some colleagues sometimes, they've got barricades on the doors and they have to ring the bell and there's a CCTV camera. Well, it's necessary, but it wasn't necessary in my day. That's how things have changed.
It's more of an intolerant society,
it is.
I think, than it was before. So am I right in thinking that every now and again you do a bit of DJ work?
I do 2 radio shows a week. I've done them for 16, 17 years. One's on a Sunday, one's on a Monday on my local FM station, Seahaven FM. You can listen to it on the internet, on the Listen Again facility anytime. So wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you can't sleep, then you can go to my radio show if you want to do that. I do one show on blues, Ain't Nothing But the Blues, and I do one show on what's called Hidden 60s, when if you're into 60s music, I play you stuff you don't know. The B-sides of the EP tracks and stuff you don't know about, which is
you're incredibly energetic. Incredibly energetic. If you were to go back into politics, back into government, and the sort of the new young bus minister came along and said, "What advice have you got for me, Norman? What advice would you give them?"
Decide what you want to do, and then work out how to do it. And then do it, and don't take no.
What would that be?
Everyone would have a different priority, but don't get fobbed off by the civil service. Who I like the civil service, but they prefer to do nothing than do something, because it's safer.
Do you think that's true?
I do think it's true, and I think that I saw this, that they don't like tall poppy syndrome. They don't like people coming. I saw some really good junior officials who were kind of sat on because it wasn't the done thing to come out with good ideas. I insisted when I was a minister, I brought the team in. If I wanted to talk about taxis, for example, which was part of my brief as well, I'd bring the whole taxi team in so I could hear the junior officials, because they had some good ideas. But I think I was unique in that, or at least not very common for people to do that. And I got told I couldn't do things as a minister. And I said, why can't I do them? And I want to do them. And I'll give you an instruction. This is what I'm doing. And I'll give you an example of that. I had to do a review of road signs.
That was exciting.
Well, it was exciting, actually. And they came forward with a recommendation to do basically nothing, or very little anyway, on the road signs. I said, I want a new road sign. I said, I've got a problem that you've got a situation where, think about Lewis, actually, where I want a situation where there's no access for vehicles, but you allow a bike to go down the inside of the road, because otherwise, I can think of this in Lewis, it's a very long diversion by cycle. And he said, oh, there's a sign for that, Minister. I said, what's that? And he showed me this Evel Knievel sign of this motorbike jumping over a car. I said, well, nobody knows what that is. And he said, well, they do. I said, well, go out in the street and ask 10 people what it means. And they did. And eight of them didn't know what it was. So they came back and said, well, no, 8 of them don't know. I said, well, what I want is, I want no entry, and underneath I want a little plaque saying, accept cycles. And there was a sharp intake of breath. He said, you can't do that. I said, why can't you do it? They said, because you're giving conflicting messages. You're saying no entry, and you're then saying you can go in. I said, what absolute nonsense. It's perfectly clear what that sign means. I said, anyway, I decided that's a decision, go and do it. So I didn't like it, but they went and do it. And now that all over London, everywhere you see those signs.
Part of your legacy.
That's my legacy.
Part of your legacy.
But left. And another example of that was that I wanted to ban wheel clamping by the private sector.
Oh.
because I thought it was outrageous that this private company can come along and clamp your car and demand money for menaces, really, to get your car. £130 there was, even back then. So I said, I said to Rosie Winterton, actually, who was one of my predecessors, I said, I want to do this, Rosie. She said, well, I totally agree with you, but you can't do it. I said, why can't you? The civil service is not possible. I said, well, it bloody well is. So I got the answer from them that it wasn't possible. I said, well, it's been done in Scotland, so why can't it be done down here? Anyway, I said, well, again, I had to say to them, I've decided to do it, so go and enact it. And, it's been done. We've no longer got people being held to ransom by private companies, and it's been completely uncontentious, actually.
Yes.
It's completely uncontentious. I should say the one person who didn't want me to do it was Philip Hammond, who was worried about the impact on Royal Holloway College, because he'd been lobbied about it, which is my old college, as a matter of coincidence. So I have to say, here we are. Here's an exclusive for you. I waited until he was on holiday and then wrote round to the cabinet and said, I want to do this. And the cabinet all said yes. And I came back with Philip. I said, it's already agreed. He was furious.
I bet he loved you after that. Well, it's been fascinating, as I knew it would be, listening to what you've got to say, your dogged determination, your innovative approach, and the sheer breadth of what you do. I'm very sort of hesitant to say, is there anything you want to do in terms of asking me any questions? I've asked you lots of questions.
Well, out of interest, what's the most difficult decision you had as a traffic commissioner?
In a judicial decision, in the public inquiry.
I don't know, any way you want to frame it.
The most difficult decisions are the ones where you're dealing with a nice man and you've got to put them out of business. It's very easy to put out of business some inveterate, unremitting charlatan with an eye for the main chance. But when they sit there with their puppy dog eyes and go, I'm ever so sorry, I promise not to do it again. I used to pick the act up and say, there's no exemption in here for being a nice man. And I think that's the hardest part, because you have to be...
Was that very often?
No.
No.
Rare. Remember, probably in 90% of cases, you don't actually take the licences away. Well, maybe a bit more, or a bit less. Most of the time, you're putting them back on the road to compliance. They're the success stories where they're non-compliant and you get them back on the road to compliance. The failures are the ones where the people are not doing it. Failure for them, but for regulation, that's a success because you're protecting people. You can't measure success like that. Joan Aitken, TC for Scotland, always talks about the invisibility of success. How many lives are saved because of what DVSA have done, because of what traffic commissioners have done, because what HS, Health and Safety Executive, have done. So,
Well, I should say that in my period as managing director of Big Lemon Buses in Brighton, which we haven't mentioned actually.
No, we haven't.
And that was an interesting time in itself. And as a qualified transport manager, which I was.
I know, I'm very impressed.
I have to say that I didn't come across the traffic commissioners once, which are a bit like number 10, number 11. It's quite a good sign.
Well, it's a very good sign. People always used to say, it's lovely to see you, Beverley, but I hope never to see you again, which is the story of my life. Well, I know you've got a very busy schedule, so thank you very much indeed for taking the time out to come and talk to us today. Thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome, Beverley.
Thank you, Norman.
As we conclude another fascinating journey through the world of transport and logistics, we want to express our sincere appreciation for listening. Your support means the world to us. Keep the conversation going by reaching out on social media with your questions and feedback. We're eager to hear from you and continue exploring together. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and check out our other episodes online. Take care on the roads and see you in the next episode.